Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andrew Booker. Thank you for joining us today for our 2021 Community Waste Reduction Grant webinar. I'm here with Christy Higginbotham. We have, it looks like, about 10 people, maybe 15 people that have joined, and then maybe some additional folks are trickling in here. But it is 1 o'clock, and I think, are going to get started with today's webinar. So let me just go through a couple of little logistical things about how we're going to do this today. Christy, if we can go to the next slide.
Sure.
Really, the first thing I want to do is just remind folks who maybe have not participated in a go-to webinar before how you will communicate with us today. So you should have a little control panel that you'll see on your screen. If it has collapsed, sometimes it'll shrink up and you'll see just a little gray bar like you see on the slide that you're looking at. There's an orange arrow, and if you click that orange arrow, it will expand, and you should see a couple options. If you flip to the next slide. There you go, thank you. So two things. The first one, I'm not going to spend much time on this, but there should be an option for audio. If you are having any trouble with your computer audio, there is a phone. If you click the phone call button, you'll get a phone number you could call in as well. But we haven't had a lot of issues with that. The one that I really want to point your attention to is that you're all muted and will be muted throughout the webinar today. And so if you would like to communicate with us, we're going to do that through that question/chat box that you should see. So what you'll do is you'll just click that little white triangle that'll expand that section of your control panel, and then you'll have a question box that you can enter a question to. And I will be monitoring that. Most of what I'll do today is monitor those questions and either answer them directly or hand them over to Christy to talk about. So I do have two questions that have come in, and these are both related to the audio feature. So Sue and Laura, you should are having some trouble with the audio. So when Christy gets started, I will try to communicate with anybody via that question feature who's having some trouble with the audio. With that, Christy, let me just jump into the agenda again. So the purpose of today's webinar is to talk about the Community Waste Reduction Grant, an overview, its purposes, its results. And then most of the day is going to talk about kind of applying for this grant, and we'll cover things like eligibility and basic parameters of the grant application, a little bit about past recipients to give you some idea about the kind of programs that we have funded through this grant program. And then a lot of time will be spent on reviewing the application package and required documentation. We will stop periodically to look for questions and answer questions. You can ask them at any time during the presentation. And like I said, I'll keep my eyes open here for questions, and we'll handle it that way. So let me hand it over to you, Christy, to get us started.
Great. Thank you so much, Andrew. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. So I'm just going to kind of start off with describing the purpose of the Community Waste Reduction Grant Program. We developed this program to provide assistance to eligible applicants to significantly reduce the waste or increase diversion of recoverable materials that would otherwise come to the Franklin County Sanitary Landfill. So we designed it to provide funding to assist with establishing programs and services while emphasizing partnership building and collaboration. And you know, we have funded a wide array of programs over the years, and we really truly look for innovation in these programs. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of our former grant recipients and current grant recipients, so that you can get a little bit more of an idea of the types of things that we're looking for. Even if it is just a recycling program, we look to work with you and collaborate with you to ensure that best practices are implemented while you either start your new recycling program or you're expanding a recycling program. And so we really take a hands-on approach to our programs, grants included. We can serve as the experts for you. We can connect you with lots of resources that can help you to implement sustainable, effective diversion programs. So we have 4 project categories identified under this program that include waste reduction and reuse, recycling, reducing or diverting organic materials such as food waste and yard waste, and enhanced public awareness through targeted education and outreach efforts. Eligible applicants include local governmental and nonprofit organizations, as well as parks, schools, and universities. This is a competitive grant program, and applications are weighted against each other and evaluated by an internal SWACO review committee. Our review committee is made up of representatives from our Innovation and Programs Department, our Legal Department, and our Finance Department. And so in order for an application to be evaluated by our review committee, there are some fundamental criteria that must be met upon submitting it. So the program activities must occur in the 2021 calendar year. Eligible applicants, again, include government entities, communities, schools, parks, and nonprofit organizations. So private not-for-profit businesses are ineligible under this program criteria. And the applicant and project must be located in SWACO's jurisdiction. So there is a map of our jurisdiction on your screen currently. And it is comprised of Franklin County and includes the cities of Canal, Winchester, Dublin, New Albany, Reynoldsburg, and Westerville. You'll also see parts of Pickerington and Lithopolis on the map, but these communities are not in our jurisdiction as the majority of the community lies outside of Franklin County. So funding for a community waste reduction grant is limited. If your project is awarded funding, SWACO will reimburse for the grant approved expenditures, provided that the awardee has submitted all of the required documentation as described in our final report requirements. We're not going to go over the final report requirements. That's something that if you choose to submit and you are awarded funding, when we execute our grant agreement, you will receive a copy of our final report for that. And so under certain circumstances, 50% of funding can be awarded upfront as part of this program. A little bit later in the presentation, I'll pull up our budget form, which is part of our application package. And I'll talk a little bit more in depth about applying for 50% upfront. If you apply and you're awarded, you receive 50% upfront funding, the remaining 50% will be reimbursed, again, upon submittal and approval of your final report. But it does need to be, this 50% does need to be requested in writing in this project budget form that we'll talk about in a little bit. So the range of funding is a minimum of 500 and a maximum of 35,000, and a 25% cash match is required. Your dollar requested matching funds description is also described in our project budget, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later in the presentation. The other thing I want to make you aware of is if your project is awarded, our communications manager and I will be in touch with you throughout 2021 to help to tell the story of your grant and how it has helped the entire Franklin County community to reduce the waste stream that's coming to our landfill. And so there are a number of ways that we approach this with our award recipients, and that can include attending board meetings and speaking, providing quotes for your news releases and newsletters, participating in media interviews, touring your facilities to see these dollars at work and take pictures. A lot of times we'll take pictures and we'll do social media posts throughout the year as well. And then just also having the ability to review materials for you is also valuable to us. So one example would be if you are awarded funding and you are including signage. We have the enhanced expertise to evaluate your signage and provide suggestions in terms of really what is best for specifically public-facing recycling programs. And you can, as a side, always reach out to us with these types of questions as well. Even if you choose to not apply for a grant, you can contact us anytime to talk about some of these best practices.
Hey, Christy.
Yes.
I'm getting a couple messages that some folks are having some trouble with the audio. So I'm just going to, just try to lean in a little bit. I'm not sure if that'll help the situation or not.
Okay, let me get real close. So this slide is a slide that, an image that I borrowed from our Recycle Right, Make a Difference campaign. And really kind of what I want to talk about here is that there are times we receive very well-intentioned applications where an applicant has proposed recycling a material that is not accepted for recycling locally. For example, cups and straws. And so we love the ambition and the creativity, but it has to be a feasible proposal and scope. And so, excuse me, I want to quickly discuss the most important or the most commonly accepted materials that could be collected for recycling in our Central Ohio programs. And that is paper and cardboard, plastic bottles, and jugs. And so if it's a plastic container where the opening is not smaller than the base, it would not be considered a bottle or a jug and would not be accepted in our traditional programs here in Central Ohio. Glass bottles and jars, cans, and this does include metal cans. This does include aerosol cans. We recommend that you do take the tips off before those are placed in a recycling container. Carton containers, and then we always recommend to keep them loose. We are really fortunate that we have the ability and that we have several sorting facilities that will accept glass and carton containers. There are many communities nationwide that do not have this ability, and so this is a really great, unique thing to our area. The materials pictured on the left side of the slide are not accepted in traditional recycling programs. You can take plastic bags back to a lot of retailers. I have noticed since COVID, though, that many of them are not doing this at this time. So the items on the left, they're not the only items that can be diverted from the landfill locally. We have funded other programs that help to reduce the generation of materials, which is really ideal because you're saving more natural resources that way. But we've also funded other types of specialty diversion recycling programs as well, and Goodwill is just coming to mind. We entered into agreement with them several years ago to increase the diversion of the donations that they accept. So, it is our hope that by offering our grants programs and collaborating with partners that share our passion for waste reduction and diversion, that we'll continue to increase this diversion rate. So if you haven't already downloaded and read through our application package, we've outlined eligible uses of grant dollars and ineligible uses of grant dollars. In terms of the eligible use of funds, those items include durable, reusable equipment to be used for waste reduction, reuse, recycling, and composting. This can include reusable containers, signage, and processing equipment. Equipment descriptions and their intended uses and pricing must be provided with the application. And if awarded, I'll just note that any equipment purchased with grant dollars must be maintained by the award recipient for at least 3 years. Supplies for education and outreach and awareness activities can include a focus on reuse, recycling, diversion, or composting, and a description of these materials and their intended use with pricing must be provided if that's what you're requesting grant dollars for in the application. And then professional services may include contractual expenses relating to the provision of waste reduction, diversion consulting, or planning services. It could also include the transport and hauling of recyclable or compostable materials. It would not include the haul away of solid waste, but it could also include fees related to the acceptance of recyclable or compostable materials at licensed facilities. And so if you are requesting dollars for these types of professional services, if it's a consultant, we would be looking for a scope of service with rates to be attached to your application, or if it's a hauler, we would be looking for quotes. So just a little bit about the ineligible use of funds. This program does not provide funding for the same program activities as previously awarded under a grant. So if you are a former grant recipient, you couldn't request dollars for the same activities. Funding for in-house personnel costs, overhead or indirect costs, general office supplies and equipment, food, catering, again, equipment or services related to the disposal of solid waste or trash destined for the landfill, hazardous waste, and any other equipment not directly tied to waste reduction or recycling are ineligible. Additionally, any services that support existing activities are not eligible. So if you're already paying for somebody to come and pick up your recycling, that would be an ineligible expense. However, funding to replace existing program costs will be considered if the proposed activities significantly expand or improve existing programs or activities. And if your grant application is approved, any expenditures made prior to both parties, so your organization and SWAPO, signing the grant agreement cannot be reimbursed. So again, if you're approved, you will need to wait until we've executed an agreement before you can proceed with making your grant approved purchases. And then as soon as the agreement is signed by both parties, you can begin making those purchases. Other ineligible uses of funds include single-use or non-durable items, so trash bags, single-use paper plates and cups, or serviceware, disposable containers, those types of things. It also includes compostable materials. So even though it is not coming to the landfill, it's still considered a disposable type of material. Okay, I am going to just pause. We still have about another 12, 13 slides to go, but I thought I'd pause here, and Andrew, maybe if there are any questions out there, we could answer them, or if anybody's still having trouble with audio, maybe we can hear about that as well.
Yeah, I think audio is resolved for the most part.
Great.
If you do have any questions about eligible expenses, now would be a great time to use that question feature and ask a question where we can, again, we'll have several times throughout the presentation where we can answer your questions. I'm not seeing any right now, Christy, so why don't we just move on to the next section?
All right, let's do it. So the images on this slide are data that has been compiled from our 2019 Community Waste Reduction Grant recipients. We've broken them out by activity type, so whether or not the project funds went towards outreach, education, and awareness, or some type of reduction or reuse activity, food waste diversion, waste assessments and or studies, or recycling activities. And so we get a lot for recycling, but food waste diversion activities have definitely been on the rise over the last couple of years, really. One thing that we really strive for with all of our recipients, and something that can make your grant application stronger, is also addressing the outreach, education, and awareness component of this. And there are specific questions in our grant application that you will need to answer should you decide to submit relating to outreach, education, and awareness. But really, that goes hand in hand with all of the other activities. So whether or not you're requesting funding for reduction and reuse, or food, or waste diversion, or waste assessments and studies, or recycling, really having a component for outreach and education, even if you're not asking for dollars for anything related to that, is important, because as we all know, with many of our programs, if you are missing education and outreach, whether it be for staff in your organization or whether it's a public-facing program, it's really hard to implement a successful program without that component. And so we really strongly encourage you to tie that into your applications. And we always have ideas as we're reading through applications. And so if you submit, I would not be surprised if we don't talk before you submit. If you submit, you may hear from me, and you know, I may reach out and ask, you know, did you think about this? Would you consider this? And having those conversations before we actually choose our award recipients. The middle image is just broken out by organization type, and so we get a lot of nonprofits applying for this grant, as well as governmental and schools. And then the last image reflects the impacts. And so this is another really strong component of this program, and you'll be asked in the application questions to address this as well, but we need to be able to measure the impact that these programs have. And so we are looking for quantitative results that speak to the amount of material that's been diverted, as well as qualitative. And some of that qualitative can be done with education and outreach initiatives, or surveys are another great way to compile some of that qualitative data. So I really like this slide. I've had the opportunity to administer all of the grants that were awarded to all of these wonderful organizations since 2016, and it has just really been a pleasure to work with all of them. I look forward to expanding this and including new organizations as well. It is a tremendous learning experience for us as well. We feel that we have a lot that we can contribute to these projects, but we also appreciate the opportunity and the willingness of all of our recipients to partner with us and collaborate and help us learn from you as well. It just really helps us improve the programs that we offer, or that we're thinking about offering in the future, and the overall the diversion of materials from the landfill. So again, we really appreciate your interest and your participation today during this presentation. So the next few slides, I'm just going to recap some of our 2019 award recipients, and that might help give you an idea in terms of some of the things that we funded in the past. So the Columbus Association for the Performing Arts was awarded funding to hire a consultant to conduct a waste minimization study and develop an action plan for waste diversion programming in the future. And prior to the development of the study, the consultant assisted with performing a waste sort and collecting data that provided a baseline and benchmark from which CAPA will be able to measure and evaluate future improvements. And so they will be implementing a public-facing program beginning at 1 or 2 facilities, give or take, or theaters rather, and then the hope is that they will expand it to all of their theaters. But this was really helpful because it helped them to understand what they were generating in the amounts of those materials and what could be diverted. One of the things that we did to partner with them on some education and outreach was that I provided a presentation to all of their staff about the importance of recycling right and what goes in the recycling bin, what doesn't, and what's available in terms of our infrastructure in Central Ohio. We're really excited also to be able to work with Ohio Health, specifically Riverside Methodist Hospital, to install containers and signage as part of a public-facing recycling program on their first floor. This is they're taking a phased-in approach to this. One of the things that was great about this application and project was that when they wrote their application, they were able to outline and describe the benchmarking that they had already done prior to submitting. And they took it a step further and collaborated with OSU students in developing a full-scale study on their waste stream and the conclusions that they reached through that study that they shared with us were extremely valuable and will help to guide them and provide a framework for them in not only effectively implementing a sustainable program at Riverside Methodist Hospital, but also at other Ohio Health facilities. And so that's kind of another piece of it that will help make your application stronger is if you are able to show that the program that you're proposing can serve as a model or is transferable or replicable, that is always something that we look at closely as well. So Hilliard City Schools and Columbus City Schools, we work with lots of school districts, not only as part of this grant program, but other programs that we offer to schools specifically within our jurisdiction. And so these are two of our public school districts that we have been engaged with not only in 2019, but for decades in terms of piloting programming and working with students to divert materials. Hilliard was approved for implementing and expanding a recycling program at all of its schools in 2019. What was great about this application was that the director of operations is the gentleman that oversees the contract for recycling and solid waste services for the district. In advance of this, he sat on a committee that we had formed to help us develop some school education and training resources that we have since rolled out and are available online for download. You can go to our website and check them out specific to recycling. And so there's a lot of partnership and collaboration already with these school districts, but having a really strong, solid foundation in their participation really helped them to implement an effective sustainable program at all of the schools in the district. With Columbus City Schools, we funded a pilot food waste reduction, diversion, and education program at 3 of their elementary schools and at 1 of their middle schools. Part of this included dollars that were awarded to SWACO through the World Wildlife Foundation. And we worked with schools to implement vermi composting, garden composting, outdoor garden composting, and then also with the World Wildlife Fund, we piloted a 6-week food collection and composting program at all 4 of their cafeterias and had the material hauled to a composting facility. We learned a lot from that experience, and as a result, we were able to develop resources for schools specific to food waste, which are also available on our website. And so we've got a really nice set of recycling resources for education and staff training, and a really nice set of school food waste resources for education and staff training. And the other thing that I'll mention as part of the recycling resources, we have a school recycling champion program where eligible schools can receive free recycling containers in exchange for their partnership in educating students and training staff. So those are really phenomenal projects I've been able to be a part of. With respect to some of our community award recipients, back in 2016, 2017, the city of Bexley was approved to have a zero waste plan developed in partnership with a consultant that focused on residential, commercial, and institutional sectors within the city limits. As a result of that, they started an environmental sustainability committee made up of representatives from the city and residents for implementing the plan and developing diversion programs within the city. And that still continues to this day. And so we're very proud of the work that they've been able to do. They also, prior to that, and without grant dollars from SWACO, implemented a residential curbside food waste program, which also continues to this day. So we're very excited to have them as a partner in a community within our jurisdiction. Similarly, the cities of Dublin, Hilliard, of Arlington, Westerville, and Worthington have received funding from us to pilot and implement residential food waste drop-off programs. And so Worthington was the first to pilot this in 2019. Their residential participation and diversion results were very positive, and as a result, their city council has approved to fund the program into the future. And so right now we're working with Dublin, Upper Arlington, Westerville, and Hilliard in 2020 to help them implement their programs. And so we're just ecstatic that these models have proven to be sustainable thus far, and they're relatively new, and so there's just a lot of learning occurring on both ends, and so we appreciate that partnership as well. Okay. So now I'm going to jump into some more of the specifics about the application package and application requirements. The deadline to submit an application, including required supporting documentation, is August 28th, 2020. We do not contact applicants to request any missing information, and so it's really critical that you ensure you've got everything that is required in your package. And we have checklists that you can also use that will help ensure that you're not missing anything. But all that being said, just know that I'm available, our team is available to talk with you about your ideas and questions prior to submitting anything. You have the ability to submit a draft application by this Friday as well. So the application must be submitted by the entity responsible for implementing the program or the project, and funding requests for expanding or improving an existing program or project must provide a detailed explanation of current activities and how funding will improve the program or the project. And then just note that applicants cannot have any outstanding financial or compliance issues. If you are selected to receive funding, when we execute our grant agreement, we will ask for other types of documentation, including W-9 and personal tax affidavits as well. So the application package itself is made up of 3 main forms that you're required to submit, and then we have the checklist just provided for your use to ensure that you've completed everything that does not need to be submitted. And so I'm just going to quickly go through each one of these forms. If you've not downloaded the package, you can see what they look like, and I'll provide an explanation so you have a better understanding of what each form is for. So Form A, that's our application cover page. It asks for your contact information and includes really kind of a snapshot of the relevant project information. The certification section at the bottom should be signed by the person responsible for submitting the application and certifying that the information provided is true. So this is where we really kind of get into the meat of things, is our Form B, our project summary and narrative. And it includes an executive summary, which should be no more than 2 pages. The project narrative is where we get into the 18 questions that are that you see here on the screen. That should be, the answers to these questions should be provided in the order in which they're asked and on separate sheets of paper. And we're asking that they be no longer than 5 pages, your responses to these questions. And so this is your opportunity to explain why your project should be selected for funding. And it's really an opportunity to clearly describe the goals and the objectives of your project, and to address how you're going to measure that impact as well. Again, the transferability of your project, or a description of how it might be transferred to other organizations, and diversion strategies on how those activities will be sustained, and if you'll continue to do them into the future should also be described. Also, addressing collaborative partnerships, job creation, and the number of people affected can definitely make your application stronger. So ensuring that your project activities are concise, well-defined, and described, again, in the sequence here that the questions are asked, is really very important. Form C is our project budget, and so this is your opportunity to demonstrate sound fiscal management and provide a realistic budget with a justified need for the financial support. So, as I mentioned earlier, this grant requires a 25% cash contribution. The cash contribution is 25% of the total amount of grant funding being requested, as illustrated on the left side. If you refer to the top, there's an example. So if you are requesting $10,000, you are required to match $2,500 for a total project cost of $12,500. And then the table below that is where you can itemize the activities or the equipment that will make up your project, whether or not you're requesting grant funding for those, what your cash contribution is to those, and then the total. There's a project summary just below that table. We're asking that that also be submitted on a separate sheet of paper, and this is where you're going to provide really a narrative, a detailed description for each of your budgeted items and how those items will be used in the project. This is also where you need to submit supporting documentation. And so if you're asking for dollars for equipment, for example, you need to have quotes for that equipment. Or again, if it's a professional service, you need to have a scope of service from the consultant with their rates included. Okay, so then looking to the right of the screen, this is where we get into the 50% upfront funding. And so there are many times organizations will just opt to take all of the reimbursement at the end of their project. But we understand that some organizations may need 50% upfront to get their project off the ground. And so on the right side of the page, we provide the description in terms of how you go about doing that. And so in order for your activities to be considered for 50% upfront funding, you have to provide sufficient justification of the need, and also include that in your budget summary. And that's your chance where you can narrate that for us. You must also contribute 25% to that 50% upfront funding. And so you need to be prepared to provide proof of that 25% with that upfront award. So for example, If your requested grant dollars are $10,000, you're requesting $5,000 up front. At that time, you'll need to be able to show us your match of $1,250 and where that is coming. Those matching dollars also need to be activities that are eligible under the grant, and that also are directly tied to your diversion program. Okay, I know that is a lot. This is our checklist. I'm not going to go through it because that's basically what I just did. Again, this checklist is for your reference. You do not need to submit this with the application. But I think we only have a few more slides left. But I'm gonna take a breath and check with Andrew and see if there are any questions at the moment.
Yeah, Christy, I don't have any questions up. Let me just, here we go. I do have one that just, it looks like Ellie just submitted a question. It says, when contracting with an outside company, such as a consulting firm, does SWACO require any supporting documents with the application? That's a great question.
Yes, so this is where you would need a scope of service, including the rates for that consulting company. And so you would want to submit their scope. Even if you've entered into a contract with them, you could submit that as well as additional documentation. Oftentimes people don't enter into the contracts with them though until they know if they've received funding, but definitely a scope of service on that company's letterhead would really help us to better understand and evaluate that request.
Yeah. So a scope of services with a quote. So that's a great question.
Yeah.
Any other questions out there related to really any of the information that Christy has covered? Any of the application pieces and parts, the budget, project focuses, anything like that? Yes. I'm not seeing anything else, Christy, so why don't we move on?
Okay, great. So this is just a reminder of the important dates that are coming up. If you have a draft that you would like for us to review, we are requesting that those be submitted by Friday, July 31st, so this Friday by 5 p.m. And that's really just to look at the entire draft application. Again, I am always happy to speak with you about on the phone anytime about your questions and your ideas. This is really just a draft application package that we offer to review for folks. And then the date to submit is Friday, August 28th. And then this just gives you an idea of our timeline. So this includes, from the deadline to submit, then what we do internally is we read through the applications, evaluate the applications, convene our evaluation committee, and score and choose our award recipients between September and November, typically. November, December, depending on how many applications we've received, and if we have to go back and seek clarification, the award notification usually occurs between late November, early December. And at that time, we'll contact everybody to let them know if they've been selected or not. But if your grant is selected or your project is selected, we'll invite you to an informational meeting. And typically that's at SWACO. We provide a tour for our attendees. Unfortunately, I can't say that we're going to be doing that this year just due to COVID. I'm not sure where we'll be at then, but at the very least, we'll provide a virtual meeting for all of our award recipients. And then the goal will be to execute our grant agreements in early January of 2021 so that you can get started on your projects. And you'll have until December 31st, 2021 to implement all of your deliverables and activities. So yeah, we're just asking that you submit your applications to grants@swaco.org. And again, do not hesitate to reach out to me with any questions or concerns. You can email me or call me. I'm more than happy to talk. I really look forward to having another really successful grant cycle. And I think that does it. Yeah, so I am happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Let me unmute myself. I think I do have one. Yeah, there is a very specific question here. If we need an online service for surveying, can that be part of a grant?
An online service for surveying.
Mm-hmm. It's hard to answer. As I said, it's hard to answer without the context of the grant application. But what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I would just say if it is a service very specific to waste reduction, recycling, composting, and how. I mean, I guess I'm kind of picturing maybe this is a community surveying residents, or maybe it's a school surveying teachers or students. I'm not sure. If the project deliverables and activities, again, are very specific to waste reduction, reuse, and or recycling, if the survey is, 100%, I think probably focused on that, I think that would be something that would be eligible. I would encourage contact me so we talk a little bit more specifically about that.
Yeah, and I kind of have similar thoughts to you, Christy. I mean, one of the things that definitely makes well, there's like two kind of contexts that I think that could make sense. One is you've talked about measurement of the impacts, and sometimes you even gave the examples of those organics drop-offs, those community organics drop-offs, and some projects are harder than others to measure the impacts, or even particularly if it's a start, like a truly new project, when you're trying to get input back from your residents or your businesses, whoever it is that you're providing that service to. Sometimes surveying is a good way to do that. So that's a good way to measure. Did they understand it? Was it easy? So that could be a very meaningful kind of part of a grant project in that context. So surveying and that kind of figuring out ways to measure impacts, I do think is an important part. And those are those great kind of questions to have with Christy kind of one-on-one. And so I really can't emphasize enough, the willingness and the importance of having those conversations. Christy spends a lot of her time on the phone. And they really oftentimes start with an email, but oftentimes end up with a phone call to get into some of the nuances of the question and the situation. So by all means, reach out to her. And the other thing I would say, encourage folks, if you haven't applied for a grant before and you're really not sure whether your project fits or whether it's the right time for you, sometimes these conversations happen over a course of a year. So even if you decide at the end of the day, now isn't the right time, it's still worth having these conversations now. It can help you get prepared for the next grant cycle. So I really wouldn't hesitate, even if you're not certain that the timing is right for you this time. So let me just see if there's any other questions that people have. I'm going to take one quick scan here. I think we've covered what we got in terms of surveying, the outside consultants. Yeah, I mean, we obviously have some restrictions on the length of these applications, the 2-page executive summary and the 5-page body. So we're not looking for a thesis here, but obviously more information is better than less for us to understand your project. These little nuances about measurement and quotes and those kind of little details are important as we evaluate them. So I think with that, Christy, maybe we should wrap it up. Why don't you go back one slide just so the last thing they see is your contact information. There you go. Perfect. We appreciate everybody participating today. And we are hopeful that we will see some of your grant applications here coming up shortly. So thank you.
Yes, thank you, Andrew, for mentioning all of that. That's all important details to note. And yeah, thank you all so much for attending today, and please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.